Hi everyone, it's Juha from Ellie. We're recording here from Ellie's fancy recording studio.
It's very fancy.
Very fancy indeed.
Okay.
Yeah, with me I have very fancy gentleman Joe Reis live in Helsinki.
Hi.
Rare event.
Very rare. Just got in last night. Yep.
Yeah. Is this your first time in Helsinki?
Yeah, first time here.
Wow. You came in at a good time. It's not a very terrible day in terms of weather.
I love how pessimistic everyone is about the weather. It's like, well, it could be worse. But I guess it does get cold here. But I also come from a cold place, and so it is what it is. But lovely city. It's one of the prettier cities I've seen on my tour, and I really like it here. It's clean. It's easy to get around. So.
I'll send a copy of this to Tourism Finland. And we'll use this as a promotion.
They can pay for my next trip over here.
Yeah, true. You came here yesterday. You already participated in one event. There was this data catalog discussion last night, and you're now here with me. And you're going to have another session with our user group. And you're speaking at an ADE event on Thursday. And you have a busy schedule.
Yep, pretty busy.
Yeah, that's you, I suppose.
I guess so.
Yeah.
It happens now.
Something I've always wanted to talk with you about is, of course, data modeling,
okay.
and that's what we do at Ellie. And you've now been touring the world talking about data modeling. In all sorts of places. Especially our team loved the presentation that you did in Big Data London.
Nice.
So that's a clip that we've been sharing to all our users and customers and everyone.
Gosh, all kinds of people with Helsinki Tourism Board and Helsinki data modeling companies. So.
Yeah, exactly. I think we kind of share some philosophical principles regarding data modeling. Mm-hmm. What you are talking about, and I suppose this is your upcoming book's central thesis in a way as well. You can explain more about that in a moment, but that data modeling is kind of more than what people usually expect it to be.
Yeah, and I think the more than what people usually expect it to be is, I think the expectation is data modeling is very physical. So we model at the database level, which is certainly true, but I think right now we begin and end with that, and that's sort of the continuum that we operate in. Things like higher level conceptual and then sort of the intermediate logical step they seem to be forgotten about for the most part. I would say like underutilized, and that's really where I would sense you get the most value out of the model. But we are where we are, so it's.
Yeah, it's easy to focus on the technological side of things. They are kind of concrete, hands-on things. This is the database table that I'm now creating, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But when you talk about higher levels of data modeling in terms of abstraction, it gets, it's no longer about our familiar little technology things. It's now about, scary business. Mm-hmm. Suddenly we have to understand what's going on in the actual organization.
It would help, right? But let's look around you right now, though, and look at the extreme where you don't want to try and understand the business in its entirety. At say a conceptual level, or even I would say at a conceptual level, just the various, even in a subdomain, understanding sort of the interplay of different concepts and the relationships of the concepts and so forth. It's sort of akin, I suppose, to starting by building a house by like building closets and doorknobs, and not really having an architectural blueprint that describes the overall structure of, say, a house or a large building, and that's where we are. So we're in the closet making business, but we have no house to put it in. I suppose is maybe an interesting way of describing where we are right now, and but that's where we are right now.
Yeah, certainly. I think there's much information that was kind of lost on the way.
Why do you think that is?
It's a good point. I was listening actually to, for example, your discussion with Bill Inman the other day. You had Bill in your podcast. You were talking about, or Bill was talking about punch cards and whatnot, and you were going through the history and everything. Just the other day, I was talking with some consultancy partners of ours, and explained. They were also asking the question: why are we not doing this? Why are we not like focusing on the business and modeling the higher levels here? What's gone wrong? And I said, I blame Hadoop. Now, it's simplifying things, of course, but I honestly think something happened along the way there where we figured out that, okay, now the storage is no longer a problem. we can just dump data everywhere, and because we don't have to optimize for storage that much, we can kind of forget about data modeling, and then we also forget about everything else relating to data modeling.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think that it definitely is a part of it where if you can, I think, compensate for thinking by just throwing a lot of horsepower at stuff, then that's sort of what we are, right? And especially now, storage is dirt cheap, compute is as powerful as you want, so you can make an argument that does any of this stuff actually matter if I can answer a question by just throwing a lot of horsepower and resources at it? And maybe for your situation it doesn't matter. Maybe you can get to where you need to go by doing that. But I think you do lose a broader context of the enterprise. And that was what Bill was alluding to in kind of a later part of that podcast where Zhamak Degani actually had a question for him. Her question was really, why did the world of software development and data diverge? And Bill brought up a really good point where software development is very much about focusing on feature delivery. Data, at least in the classical analytical sense, is focused on understanding the enterprise through data, and these are two different roles, and these are two different tasks. They're not the same thing. And so Hadoop is very much a software engineering feat, right? Because the amount of data that companies like Yahoo and Google were processing were just too much for commodity. I would say commodity, but specialized databases, your traditional databases that you were using back in the day, relational databases. And so you had to do this stuff out of necessity. And I think that Hadoop definitely was. It was a necessary thing for these types of companies, and you had to build it. And companies still build a lot of stuff. Once they kind of reached past the what's available from vendor offerings and so forth. So Hadoop definitely facilitated it, or it gave people, I think, the liberty to try new things. Mongo and document storage also did that with app developers and so forth. And I think you have to couple this though with another thing, which is another development in software engineering, which is the rise of Agile. And so one of the things I think happened as well is, people took the Agile Manifesto and appropriated that for all sorts of things that maybe it wasn't intended for. The Agile Manifesto is very much for, continuously delivering software. I don't think I recall seeing the word data or analytics in the Agile Manifesto. I could be wrong, but what you see though is, if you take Bill Inman's logical conclusion that software engineering of delivering features and classic data use cases of understanding the enterprise, from an analytical level, these are two different activities and they require two different modes of thought. I always like to say that data is a thinking person's game, but we're trying to cram a thinking person's game into 2-week sprints. And so how is that dichotomy supposed to hold? Well, it turns out that Agile won because every company wants to do Agile and deliver things quickly, because why would you want to do otherwise, right? Mm-hmm. And so that, I think that mode of thinking, along with the fact that you can throw tremendous amounts of compute and storage at problems, means that we are where we are. So it would be easy to forget the traditional ways of data modeling, and by that I even mean techniques like normalization and relational data model, which dates back to 1970. And that if you ask a software engineer today about relational modeling, I would wager to guess that people sort of say they do it in spirit, but in practice it's really easy to, even if you started with it, it's really easy to get away from it for a lot of reasons. So yeah, that's the world we're in. And then analytics, obviously, the rise of ELT meant that the plus of ELT is it took advantage of the separation of compute and storage, which was really the whole reason for it. But it also meant that along the way you could start adopting principles from the Hadoop era or the big data era of like one big table, which was, you do one big table because you have gigantic amounts of data that literally would crush a relational data system. It just would, until you want to optimize for performance. That's why you put it into one big table. Then I think they're thinking as well, but we can just put everything to one big table, even with my gigabyte-sized data set, and we'll be off to the races. But you see the consequences of that, right? And what I think, to your point, when you with your customer, when you back up to the question of what happened to sort of zooming out, and understanding the business logic, it's really hard to do that when you're forced to focus on, sprints and epics. It's really hard to Because now you're focused on you're delivering data widgets. You're not focusing on sort of the higher level abstractions and understanding how everything interrelates. And so that's my theory on why we are where we are.
Yeah, you were also talking about this a little bit with John Giles, our common friend, and John wrote a couple of books on data modeling, and he wrote this book, is it the Nimble Elephant?
Yeah, Nimble Elephant.
About modeling based on patterns, and there the idea was that you don't have to get every detail right on the kind of highest level. You just need to get that town plan right, and you can do that by applying kind of known patterns. That we are dealing with events or contracts or whatever, and those usually look something like this. So there's your basic data model pieces already. You just have to add a little bit, your secret sauce of how your particular organization deals with that, and then you build from these patterns the big picture, which is good enough to go forward, so that you don't lose that track of what the individual projects you're working on actually deals with. I think that's a good approach, and that's, I think, in John's approach as well, he mentions this is kind of his idea of how to do this in agile way. You're doing little pieces by pieces as you go.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think patterns are one of the most underrated utilities. It's one of those things I talk about in my own talks now, and in this upcoming book and upcoming blog posts on it soon. With it's like patterns in general have been forgotten about. I realized they existed because I read John Giles' book, and then I went back and found the data model resource books, and those are fantastic. And I think a lot of them still hold their weight. They still describe the realities of a business to this day. The classic party and roll pattern is you could still use that today, and the whole notion of what John's trying to advocate, and same with Lynn Silverson and the person who wrote the data model resource book, is that just as you would, design a building by using architectural patterns, you want to design your conceptual and logical models using patterns as well. There's no sense in reinventing the wheel. It's not like business has fundamentally changed to the point where the models described in these books, and they're probably 20 years old at this point. It's not like they're completely obsolete. I mean, the manufacturer still manufactures things and ships them in much the same way as they did back in the day. And these models are very extensible and allow for the notion of inheritance, right? If I'm thinking about it in an object-oriented sense, and so you could very much apply these patterns today. And I think, as I advocate, and John does, and other people, you can get 50 to probably 75-80% of the way there. The point isn't to have these models like mimic your business. The point is at least give you a starting point in order to kind of think about how your business translates to data. And understand the workflows and the business concepts and information flows and vocabulary of your business, and how does that represent itself at a conceptual and logical level, and then from there you can make any optimizations you need to fit your business. But I think this also allows, I think the other thing that John sort of talks about, which I see missing now, is the conceptual models, especially if you're using patterns. It allows people to get on the same page. By people I mean business stakeholders, engineers, basically anyone who touches data or might have a role in, or a business process that what you're trying to capture with data. All these things really facilitate themselves really well for a common shared vocabulary and understanding of what we plan to do with data. And from an agile perspective, sure, you want to, I think, do things iteratively and come back and review things often, just as a model needs to be revised to reflect the nature of a business. But it's an interesting one. There's an interesting book that actually Ananth Pakaldiri, he puts out the Data Engineering Weekly newsletter, but he turned me on to a book called How Buildings Learn, and it talks about how, from an architectural perspective, we design buildings, but then they sort of take on a life of their own, right? But that's the whole point of a building. A building is never a static thing, right? It evolves. The building we're in right now probably went through many iterations, and
even this closet where we are sitting now.
Yeah, this is now a studio. This used to be probably something else, right?
Yeah.
And so, but that's the whole point. Things change. Like how you architect something is not going to be the architecture that things evolve into. So buildings themselves, adapt, and that's, I think, how you need to view data as well. The reality of your business changes, so you can't just create a conceptual model and say it's one and done, but at least that provides the basis of understanding of how we want to think about data, and not just data, but how we want to think about our company and our organization and what we're trying to do. So.
Yeah, because I mean, a proper data model is living document, right? It follows the reality of the business. It's a description of the business. My favorite quote in the whole world, Alex Sharp wrote that a data model is a description of a business in terms of the things it needs to know about.
Right.
And I think that's kind of the whole point. It's a description of the business.
Mm-hmm.
So if the business lives, figures out new ways to make money, then the data model lives with it.
Right.
And that's how we deal with things, and the data model describes that at the conceptual level. Then for individual, whatever rooms you are building into that building, the closets and the doorknobs and whatnot, those might change. Okay, you create star schemas for that thing and whatever for other things, one big table for something else. But the core of that model, the conceptual understanding of what the business is and what it needs to know about, that lives with the business, not with the kind of technological solutions that you create.
And it does embed itself in a technology solution, too. So the way I look at it is, I actually consider analytical use cases to be among the last things we need to be talking about from data modeling. The upstream use of data, the upstream creation, and manipulation of data happens at the application level. Typically, that's where it happens, and so you have to get it right there. But as the reality of the business evolves, right, like that's where the notion of sprints and feature delivery come into play. But that should, those changes should be reflected in the conceptual model, because again, as the reality of the business changes, it should change to the conceptual first, and then manifest itself however you want to model through the whole life cycle of data, right? Like I always consider data to usually start at the application, because it typically does, because that's where you're trying to capture the interface with a customer, for example, right? Like customer's not going to be interfacing with your star schema. First of all, they're probably going to be interfacing like a form where they fill out some details and so forth, and that gets captured in an application, and that turns into a record of a customer maybe, and right. But say you have a new onboarding process for a customer, well, that's probably going to change things, and your conceptual model of customer hopefully doesn't change too much, but maybe it does. And so but the conceptual model happens whether you acknowledge it or not, because it happens when you're talking, when you're whiteboarding about new workflows. I mean, that's essentially what you're doing. You're just forgetting to capture it in a way that's shared with other people, but that's the reality of it. And often data people, for example, are the last ones to know, and then they're sitting there trying to interpret business rules and logic, when really you have to think about this through the continuum of when data is created to when it dies. I think it's one thing we just have been really terrible at across the board, as we consider, we'll just focus on an analytical piece here, right? It's only one piece of the puzzle. You have machine learning and AI, and you also have applications and transactional systems, and then you have analytical. And the only piece that humans really touch is the analytical piece, right? I mean, everything else, that's data that's produced and consumed by machines typically. Humans may invent the mechanisms, or say the classes or the functions that produce some sort of an action programmatically, but that those actions and that data is typically reserved for machines, not people, right?
But in the end, the data model is kind of a translation between what the machines do and what the humans do, right? It sort of allows us, with different levels of data models, allows us to map from the individual databases and tables and so on up to the things that we actually deal with, like invoices and customers and so on, which I think brings me to a topic that I think is also quite important here, which is the kind of communication aspect of data models.
Yeah, it's a big one.
That it's not just the kind of pathway from requirements to implementation, but it's often a tool that we need also between humans to understand how this works.
Yeah.
So engineers need to understand, how controllers want their financial data to look like, but they also often see that the financial folks have to understand how supply chain managers talk about data and so on and so forth. So it might be a communication method between humans without any systems even being involved.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's where it all starts. You're simply taking those communications and translating that into code when you're writing an application. Right. I mean, that's literally. I mean, that's typically the role of a product manager. They're the translation layer. Maybe a dev is good enough to figure that out, but that's why you have product and project managers typically to make sure the trains run on time and that the requirements, that the customer wants are being delivered by software. And so it's, but again, if you look at how project management's set up, I mean, that's typically, name a product manager, for example, that understands sort of the holistic view of the business, right? Like that's actually really rare. That might be the chief product officer.
Yep, which I tried to do as best as I could.
It's hard, but then you had a big company and, there's a lot of balls to juggle with that one, right? But these requirements of the whole point is that, they're typically focused again on feature delivery. I need to add certain widgets here, but how does that affect, the machine learning model that might rely on this data or might be a part of this product and might be fed other data, and then, if I want to do analytics on that, how are we using that data for analytics? Like, those are the discussions I wish would happen more. And again, the conceptual model provides the whole basis for all of that because there's a shared understanding. It's like, okay, so here's the information, here's the process, here's how everything flows. Like these are the relationships. But right now, again, it just feels like everything's just kind of done in an ad hoc manner, and so
Do you see that the kind of let's say art and science of data modeling could also be how should I put it? Decentralized and federated to outside the data teams as well, because now you're talking about product managers, project managers, and I fully agree that there's knowledge there that should be captured in those. There's communication there that should be captured. But for example, the role of business analyst is not super visible right now, especially in data space. So isn't data modeling really kind of something that should be kind of common to us all, a way of communicating these days? I
think, the practice of data modeling, and call it whatever you want. I mean, John Giles calls it the town hall planning and whatever. I think it's just the notion that we all rely on data. We all need to agree on certain things. However we do that, however we do that, that's probably organizationally different, but I do agree that that's a necessary step. Because you can see what's happened as a result of not doing it, right?
Yeah.
So applications are a mess. Analytics teams, data teams. I mean, we've all been on them, and it could be a lot better. So I mean, I suppose that this is probably where we need to go, and how we get there. It's still a journey. It's still I don't know how you implement this realistically, but. And the danger is, even if you did have the success of Agile, where everyone says they're adopting it, I think things get misinterpreted. So, as I always call it cargo cult Agile, because I feel like people say they're doing Agile, but it's often in spirit and not in principle. So, so who knows? But I think the biggest thing is that we start acknowledging that. If we're going to be, quote, data-centric and be data-driven, which I absolutely hate that term, but we'll use it anyway, then, the biggest thing is a shared common understanding of data, and that's the conceptual model. It's plain and simple.
That reminds me, I also strongly dislike data-driven, but a few years ago at Ellie we were figuring out kind of catchphrases and stuff like that for for marketing material, whatnot. The one we came up was business-driven data, because we thought that what point is to have a data-driven business? We don't want to have the business be driven by data. We want the data work to be driven by the business. That's kind of the whole idea.
Yeah.
So isn't that something that data modeling and data modeling focused vendors like us should actually be focusing on? How do you get your business to actually drive your data work? I'm not sure if we use that anymore I can't see any banners anywhere.
I don't see it anymore in here.
Yeah. But I always thought that was a good idea, because that's what it's sort of about.
Well, yeah, and it's it kind of harkens back to a lot of stuff I rant about, which is I think that we'd be good as a industry to maybe drop the word data even, but we're not going to. So, because really you're talking about business processes and domains, and and you're trying to. If you're doing analytics, you're trying to reflect, what those, operations do, for example, right, and give them useful metrics. And so, but the hardest gap really is that as data professionals, we want to do data things, and the problem is we're very much the outsiders at companies. Most non-data people really don't care. They have a hard time empathizing, and so I think that's the reality of it. But data people want data, and that's I'm not going to change that. So
no, I think that's kind of natural. Why not? Some people are more happy to focus on technical kinds of things, and some people are more happy to focus on others. I think the common ground and understanding and language that we share, that's the important thing.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. Like if we just learn to speak the language of the business, by we I mean data professionals, and that communicate in those terms, I think you're gonna have better outcomes. If you start talking about dimensions and facts and all this stuff, I mean, keep that to your data team, but I wouldn't go directly to the business and talk about that, because you're gonna bore them to tears and confuse them. And and data people have enough trouble at I think getting the business to understand what they do. I don't think you need to provide them with more evidence. So.
Yeah, and I think that's the kind of problem that is behind all this value talk now that you see that everywhere. That what business value are we actually producing? Are we actually producing any value? Where's the value in your data team? So I think much of that is due to the fact that we are not very good at explaining in business terms what we're actually doing here.
Yeah.
We just say, we brought in 800 new tables into the data warehouse. So good for you. Why?
Yeah, I don't know, 800, why not 801, right? So, and it's an interesting one. Like I've been talking about this a fair bit with my friends, in one camp, I'll name names, like, Chris Tabb out Housley, they're working on a book on business value, but I'm urging them to definitely take an approach that isn't just your typical, kind of blue shirt and khakis, boring as hell book. Those books suck. And I don't think they will. They're smart enough to know that book's not going to really deliver any quote value, I guess. And so it's ironic in a way, right? Because we're trying to describe business value in a book that also has to deliver value. But there's so many trite ways of describing business value. I'm not quite sure what it means. The only thing I've noticed, and I was talking with another friend of mine, Sol Rashidi, about this the other day, and she's been chief data officer at a lot of big companies, and one of the best in the world at what she does. But even she for her, it's just focus on use cases and outcomes. Like, I just think I made the comment, like if you have to keep crying about how much business value you're delivering, it's probably like an inverse relationship between how much value you're delivering and how much you talk about it. And so but to me, the business value discussion, I think it's useful, but it also screams that it's a cry for help.
In a way,
like if that's screwed as an industry, then I don't know. And like, what are we doing?
But I don't know how you feel about kind of corporate IT culture and its effect on this. But the way I've kind of seen is that this is just a continuum of the age-old discussion of IT as a cost center. All we do, we are a cost center. We keep the lights on. We're a cost center. We do things that basically just keep more lights on, and occasionally maybe we light up a new light somewhere else. But I think that's an age-old discussion. We're not part of the organization that produces value, and we're trying to kind of break out of that as data industry somehow. Yeah,
it's a question of offense versus defense at this point, right? Yeah, so if you're playing defense, you're probably a cost center, and you should be treated as such. And so, but the thing is, this is outside of your control typically as a data team, right? So if data is a competitive advantage, if it's a mandate, and it has to come from the top down. I mean, this isn't something it's another thing Sol and I were talking about. It's just the bottoms up approach is.
What's that?
The door just opened here. I think it's probably a ghost or something. Kind of like it though.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, more air.
Nice breeze in here. Yeah. Nice cold Helsinki afternoon. But it's a notion of offense and defense, right? But as companies become more focus on utilizing data, in their applications, in their business, and using that to a competitive advantage, you start adopting an offense mentality, and that drives you. That switches you from being the cost center to being the revenue driver, right? But and traditionally, for the folks out there, IT was responsible for data because data was typically an internally focused thing. You were making reports for internal consumption. right? Your KPIs, your dashboards, or whatever, your reports were typically meant for driving internal decision making. That's changing, right? I mean, it took an Uber to get here. Uber is a very vast data-powered product.
Exactly, and there the data is really the whole business. There's no, they don't really have like fixed assets much. There's no factories, there's no machinery. There's just data about rides and drivers, and then you organize that accordingly.
Yeah, that's just it. And so that's an example of it. Google, data-powered company from day one, right? And so, but again, as I think the gap's really going to be if with quote mature companies that really do have to cross that chasm towards being quote more data driven, right? Especially with the rise of AI right now, you're going to see a lot of companies. I mean, I was having lunch with some folks and they were telling me how all the CEOs are talking to in the Nordic area are wanting to do AI, and anything with AI in the name gets funded immediately, right? And then the next question I have is, so what's the purpose of this? Well, it's to do AI. That's the purpose. And then, then the next question is, so what data do you have to support these initiatives? I.e., what data are you going to use with your AI? And that's, I think it's an open-ended question. So I think the motivations are noble. I think the promise of, I was watching OpenAI's a dev event yesterday, and the day before, and that was cool to see. There's a lot of cool stuff happening, and OpenAI single-handedly killed off a ton of startups yesterday too that were silly enough to want to have an OpenAI wrapper and think that was a company. That's a different rant. But the attention's here. Every company wants to clamor and do this stuff, and so the question I would have is, does this take data from being a cost center to being a revenue driver? So
I mean they are just tools in the end, and we've always had all sorts of tools, and now we have more tools to play with. But I think the AI question warrants a couple of more details. AI and data modeling. Now, I think originally then when our team met you in Big Data London, you had a chat about kind of LLMs being used to help with data models, because that was the kind of thing that we were testing out back then, and we're still kind of on it. It's fun and interesting. But there's another way to look at that, and I'm seeing now some noise coming from the knowledge graph area. That can we use these structures, these knowledge graphs and stuff like that, to kind of guide the machine learning the large language models to certain directions, say that our reality looks like this, and now given my prompt you understand better what I'm after. And I'm kind of seeing that also it doesn't have to be a full-blown knowledge graph. Why not just simple, again, the data model is a description of my business, right? So if I'm able to tell the AI that, hey, my world looks like this, isn't that already something that would be possibly used for all sorts of purposes?
And for sure, I think because the main thing that large language models typically lack is context, and so if you give a descriptive context, I suppose that would work. I haven't tried it. Knowledge graphs provide definitely a backbone of context just because of the way they're structured. And I can't remember if there's a paper on like graph embeddings or something. I need to go read it, but the notion of a graph is definitely seeing a pretty big resurgence. I think it's cool. My friend One Cicada is doing a lot of work on this stuff, and it's also a lot of other people, and it seems promising. It's sort of the yin and yang of what they do, and large language models are good at generalizing, but they at the end of the day they're token generators. That's all they do, and so they don't have. So the graph definitely provides the context, which is the yang, I suppose. The generalization's yin, but
true.
It's cool, and I need to go play around with GPT-4 Turbo. Like that's supposed to have like 100,000 plus tokens, and that's pretty cool. And but I mean, hell, you're talking about a year. This stuff's been publicly available. At least just ChatGPT. So who knows where it goes? But I think it does hold some promise. I think in terms of speeding up a lot of the work of data modeling, right? But the biggest crux right now to me is the whole text to SQL. As I've been doing some work on that, I feel the underlying, so text to SQL for the audience, basically, it's you put a text input that gets transcribed to some sort of a SQL that is then run on a database. Now, how it works today is the text to SQL mechanism that encoding decoding. It's basically probabilistically looking at the column names of the database it plans to query, and so if you have malformed names, or if your data model is, I would say, if it's pretty clumsy, you're probably going to get some weird results. But then it's as if but the other thing is, like, if you're already relying on these databases for BI and you're getting substandard results, I don't know how a probabilistic engine is going to provide you any greater leverage in terms of the type of query that you're doing on this this crappy database. And so that's the whole crux of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, garbage in, garbage out, that doesn't change.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like if you gave a query to an intern or instructions to figure out, go query this database, it's about what it's doing right now. So, and again, the performance of these queries and the results they come back with, I mean, it doesn't take into account, okay, so I have one big table, this one big table is notorious for duplicate data. It doesn't know the predicate filter it has to put on this certain column because, like, somebody screwed it up back in the day and there's some weird business logic, right? Like, so that's the stuff where I feel, having a good underlying data model will facilitate better answers, especially as the question is now, I want to be able to put a large language model on top of my corporate data sets and be able to ask it questions. Okay, that's great. How is that underlying data model and data set today? If it's great, then go for it. But the question I always ask in my talks is, to the audience, I've asked this to thousands of people now, is, okay, so who in the audience would be willing to bet your job on putting a large language model on top of your business and having that run in production? I think one of my friends raised her hand because she's doing that at her company for a product. But this is American style layoffs too. Like, you can get fired on the spot, not 4 months like they do here or whatever the warning you get. But it's like, the good old American way. You screw up, you're out, like that second. Yeah. So, and nobody wants to do this.
Yeah. I think that's the thing. So how was it? I had a coffee mug someday that said, "Coffee, do stupid things faster with more energy." And many of these tools are us doing stupid things faster with more energy, but the things are still stupid.
Yeah.
We're kind of, building railroads to nowhere, and then we're thinking about upgrading it to maglev or something.
Yeah.
And this is kind of the core thing that can't be fixed with sort of new tools that we use, but we can of course use those tools to make this stuff that we're doing right now more efficient if the things that we do are sensible in the first place.
Oh yeah, and I'm very interested to see what you guys come up with for using large language models to extract meaning and context and create a conceptual model. Like, I think it's obvious that current ways we've been trying to do conceptual modeling probably aren't going to work because it requires, you have to get people in a room and talk and all this stuff. And, and I would say that was hard before COVID. Now it's like very, very difficult. And, you don't have to be in the same room, but, coming up with a shared vocabulary. So, if the large language model can get good at, understanding your business, and maybe it could provide you with, those patterns, so to speak. And I think that's actually pretty dang cool if it could do that. I feel like that, we're in an age where, a lot of the data modeling stuff that maybe a lot of the sins that we've committed, so to speak, it's possible that these could, large language models could actually help move this along in ways that humans couldn't, because it can operate at a scale much more quickly than we could.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah. And I think there's kind of two problems to kind of data modeling large scale. The other is as you said, the initial point where you try to create that data model.
That's a huge one.
That takes a lot of effort, a lot of people, and you just have to communicate with people, unless we figure out a way to do that via LLMs or something, but still it requires that contact with a lot of humans. The other problem is kind of what we call them the small problem and the big problem because of the scale here, but the big problem is how do you then manage the whole enterprise, considering that you've now created a bunch of diagrams and you have a bunch of terms and you probably have some definitions for those terms. So how do you figure that out, which is like completely another different animal as a problem and has different solutions, and maybe we can use AI capabilities there as well to find like synonyms and possible matches and stuff like that. But I think these are kind of both issues that have probably also caused the downfall of data modeling earlier on, that it has been too difficult to create models and too difficult to maintain them.
Well, yeah, absolutely, and that's all, and that's just the stuff that you're creating, right? And so I actually have a podcast with Dave McComb that's dropping, I think today, just any second actually, and he talks about. So Dave McComb's written, he wrote a book called Software Wasteland, which is awesome. And it talks about how, despite all of our advances, why does it actually cost more money to develop and deploy applications than it used to? You think they'd get cheaper with Moore's law, and then his other book, The Data-Centric Revolution, talks about, okay, so, especially with the rise, and this might actually be another factor in data modeling I hadn't considered before, but, how many SaaS applications do you use to run your business, right? Each one of those has its own data model that's hidden from you, and yet you're trying to shoehorn your business logic into this stuff. And so what he's done through his company Semantic Arts, which is pretty cool, is he can take all these applications and through a knowledge graph, distill it down to a few hundred concepts, right, across many SaaS apps and internal apps as well. And so maybe that's the other distillation of it as well. And so, but I think that it's, there's a lot of good things that we've done with data modeling over the years. A lot of things that still hold. I think the way Codd described the relational model is still probably one of the single-handedly the best practices for just understanding the relationships of your data in a way that removes the dependencies and redundancies and side effects from your data, because it's literally just set theory, and so that should work. But I suppose I'll be interested to see what happens. I think that there's, like I said, still a lot of merit in the old techniques that we should bring forward, patterns being another one, and so forth. But it's clear that if we can't get this right, it's sort of a paradox, because you want to get it right in order to facilitate better AI, but maybe AI is also maybe the thing that helps drive this along in a way that humans can't. If you have a system just introspect all your data sources, and including your SaaS apps, maybe it comes up with a better conceptual model of everything, and maybe that's where we're going. But who knows? But it still doesn't mean conceptual modeling goes away. It just means you outsource it to an automated thing, exactly. Right? So
you use a helper tool maybe to make make it easier for you.
Yeah.
But the fact remains that you have to be able to describe what is going on, so that you know in which direction you should be building that railroad track.
Well, until you have a corporation that's run completely by AIs and so forth. That's actually been a thought of mine. It's like it's an interesting thought experiment. Like, what would a company look like that was maybe one person owns it, or maybe a DAO or something like that. If you want to get really autonomous, not even a person owns it, and then it's run completely either by heuristics like if-else statements or machine learning. And I think you're actually going to see a company like that in the not too distant future. It just seems like it should happen.
No, it's an interesting concept. Yeah.
So
we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
No, but I think we fully agree both that whatever happens with tools and methodologies, there are certain things that we must keep doing one way or another. Data modeling is one of those things that it's just something that we can't avoid. I remember someone, I can't remember now who said it, but said that everyone does data modeling, and some people do it like deliberately.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the fact that's not going to change.
Well, it's like you everyone breathes.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's better ways of breathing than others, but it's I said breathing, not breeding, by the way. So I realized that may have sounded weird. But no, it's true. I mean, as I say in my talks, a crappy data model is still a data model. Those are the models you don't think about. But every time you touch data, you're modeling it, because you're trying to represent reality in data. Right, you're trying to represent a process or some aspect of reality, and that is modeling at the end of the day. Like, one of my friends, he was saying, I don't believe in data modeling, right? Because he was working on a data team, and then I said, well, where do you get your data from? He's like, well, the upstream team, they have a nice relational model. And I was like, well, okay, and somebody thought of it, upstream, and you have the convenience of having really good data that you can use, and so you probably didn't think you're modeling, but like, you're still modeling. You just put a name on it. But anyway, it's interesting, but. I'm glad these discussions are happening, though. It's we always go through this pendulum cycle where we go to one extreme and then the other, and I feel like we're swinging back to from the age of fast and relaxed to more, I wouldn't say rigorous and formal, but maybe some sort of blend between there. So
Yes, as you titled your talk in London, if I recall correctly, it was data modeling's dead, long live data modeling.
Yeah.
So something is kind of being, rising from the ashes like a phoenix bird or something like that.
Yeah, or a bird in a big landfill, a seagull.
Seagulls racing through the landfill. Yeah, that's also a good metaphor for that. Now, perfect. I think we should be about to wrap up this.
Yeah.
One thing I still want to mention before we end, you're working on your book on data modeling.
Yeah.
My only question I have two questions. One is when it's going to come out, but I don't want to ask that question. I want to ask, is it going to be an optimistic look on what we can do, or a pessimistic look on what we have done wrong?
It'll be a very realistic view.
Yeah,
I'll put it that way. I think it's going to be a mix of both.
Good.
I don't want to leave people completely bummed out. I'm looking at my book over here on your desk here, Fundamentals of Data Engineering, and I think that left things on an optimistic tone. I'm not here to pontificate and preach to people. I'm just here to show people, look, these are techniques. These are the trade-offs of the techniques. At the end of the day, I personally don't care what you do. You can choose to ignore all this and me. I don't really care, right? But at least know your options, understand, what the possibilities are, and I think, based on your constraints and your fortitude and personality, I suppose that your decisions are your decisions. But that's the approach I'm taking with it, and it'll be out I'm going to generically say first half of the year, because I'm also working on a gigantic monster course with deep learning AI, right? So this book would have been done by now, but this course is it's insanely important, and it's going to be big, and so I have to obviously put a lot of time into it. Plus, I've been on this perpetual world tour, which I'm putting at least international travel. I'm putting the kibosh on that. Starting December, at least for the first half of the year, because I just got to get these projects out, and so.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
We're eagerly awaiting that.
I know everyone has been talking about it, so let's get out. But yeah, so there's a subset called Practical Data Modeling, which I'm going to start putting materials out in December. And actually, a lot of the book's going to be early release chapters are going to be published on Substack. Right.
Cool.
So yeah, and it's going to be released on a new imprint that I'm actually going to be announcing. Early part of next year.
Okay.
Yeah. So
that's going to be super cool. I think that sort of book is sorely needed. I think we need to have more information about the options we have and the methods that we could use. As you said, no matter what we end up using, there's not enough information maybe going on in the let's say modern data circles about these topics.
No, I mean, if you look at, God forbid you have to go on Reddit or someplace like that, but the common thing is, I need to do, everyone talks about Kimball, right? And we're still talking about Kimball. I think Kimball's great. It's a great approach. It's one approach. There's other approaches. One big table is one approach. Just a bunch of tables is one approach. But you need to, if you're in analytics, know the options. Same with software engineering, right? You could use a relational model. If you choose not to do that, right, then understand what happens and understand the other approaches. If you want to, put data into a document database or nested data set, some sort of semi-structured thing, so how do you think about that? I still think relational modeling holds for at least understanding the relationships of your data, even if you're doing event data, semi-structured data. But again, it's the world of data modeling in general as a whole hasn't caught up to where we are, right? In analytics, the last big event was Data Vault. I think it was 2000 the book was released. Data Vault's terrific, right? But along the way, now you mentioned big data, NoSQL, Hadoop, and that happened. Streaming happened. You have machine learning. You have a bunch of use cases for data that we need to talk about. It's not just star schema versus whatever right now, and it's not just however you do it in transactional databases. There's a slew of techniques out there, and the thing is, we got to think about data as a continuum of creation to death, and in between there are different ways of transforming and manipulating data, and each one of those is a model, right? And so that's, I think, that what we're missing right now is a holistic view of data.
Exactly.
That's the big one. But then on top of that is the conceptual model, because the concept still needs to hold no matter what you're trying to do with it, right? And that's the other overarching piece that I think we forget about. We're so myopically fixated on our little piece of the data kingdom that we lose the grand picture of what we're just trying to do, and I think it's time to just reorient the way we see the world. So that's the goal of the book.
Absolutely, and I think we can certainly agree on that. On that note, I think we can also wrap this up. Thank you, Joe.
Sounds good, dude. Thank you.
This has been good discussion.
Likewise.
Always good to discuss with a kindred spirit on these data modeling issues.
Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks for having me. You're great. Thank you.
Thanks.